It's 6 a.m. in Jerusalem. The city is awakening. In the pre-dawn hours, the Sanhedrin, who bound Jesus and put him on trial all night long, are starting to make their way through Jerusalem towards Pilate's house. It's about a half-mile journey to Pilate's house from the high priest where Jesus was tried. And they would have walked down aisles like this in the pre-dawn hours where the sun is yet to arise and yet there's enough light to go about your business. And 6 o'clock in the morning was the Romans' time to start the workday. So Pilate woke up that morning, got ready, and at 6 a.m. opened his gates ready for a normal day of work. And the Jewish leaders brought Jesus forth, and the trial of Jesus began in the pre-dawn hours. As we begin our journey, imagine this is the place where Pilate condemned Jesus, where Jesus was flogged, beaten. The crowd cried out, "Crucify him," and he picked up his cross for the first time. As we begin our journey, this is the point of the road or the path to crucifixion, that Jesus carried his cross for you and for me. So as we begin, imagine this is where Jesus picked up the cross for the first time. And so we've walked 230 steps. 230 steps Jesus has taken down the path towards his crucifixion, knowing what will be at the end. 230 steps later, we find that out of exhaustion, the cross bearing down, he trips, he falls, the weight of the cross pinning him to the ground. The soldiers, not wanting to touch Jesus nor pick up his cross, looked around and they saw a passerby, Simon. They told Simon that he had to go and start picking up the cross. Now Simon was going around his ordinary day. He was coming in from outside the fields to probably get ready for Passover. And suddenly he was forced by the Romans to pick up the cross. This wasn't his plan. This wasn't his hope. This isn't what he wanted. This disrupted his plans. And so he picked up the cross and diligently, for the rest of the journey, followed behind Jesus. And so we continue on our journey. We've now made it 420 steps from where we originally started. Jesus, relieved of the weight of the cross, found the strength to continue the uphill journey. The uphill journey, taking the last little bit of energy he has. And when he reaches the top, his knees give out and he falls again to the ground. And while he is there, he hears the mourning and the lamenting of the people around him. He rises to his knees, turns his gaze towards them, and he cautions them of things worse yet to come. Because the people there, they were mourning not only for Jesus, but for the loss of hope. For going up Calvary, the way of crucifixion, was a one-way journey. They knew that when Jesus came there was no return. And so every step he took towards Golgotha was a step or a loss of their hope. They had sacrificed everything for Jesus, and their hopes, their expectations were dying with every single step. And Jesus rises up, continues on the journey. We've now journeyed 570 steps from his condemnation at Pilate's house. The last bit of road has been nice and flat, and Jesus has been able to continue laboring along the city walls until the judgment gate, where he would exit the city. As he turns through the gate, he trips over the threshold, and he falls for the third time. The two soldiers two condemned criminals who were following behind him turn the corner, and they as well fall down at the sight. Not the sight of Jesus, but the sight of Golgotha. For now, Jesus, while he's laying on the threshold, can look up and see his end, the hill of Golgotha, where he will be crucified. What kept Jesus there? As he was looking at where he was soon to be crucified, just a few steps away, what was his motivation? See, death is going to come for us all, and death was there for Jesus very shortly. But Jesus had spent his whole life preparing for this moment. And Jesus, knowing what was at stake, knowing that the full wrath of God was going to hit him in a few steps, raised up off the ground and took the last steps to where he would be crucified. We've completed 700 steps, the distance between Pilate's house and the place of crucifixion. Jesus, exhausted, lays on the ground, waiting for his time to come. Simon drops the cross. Relieved of his responsibility, turns and walks away. The soldiers make quick work of Jesus, crucifying him and hoisting him up, the two criminals on either side, and they sit down to divide his clothes. But what's interesting with the Gospels is they sum up this act with only 4 words. There they crucified him. See, crucifixion was so horrible that they didn't even talk about it. Everybody knew how horrible it was, and that's all they had to say. So there he hung. At 9 a.m. in the morning, he was put on the cross. For 6 hours he stood. For 6 hours he hung, pardon me. And then at 3 p.m. he died. The light of the world extinguished at 3 p.m. As we finish our journey, we look back upon the path. You can see where you began, and you can see where you end. This is the road that Jesus walked. 700 steps from condemnation to crucifixion. It's both shorter and longer than you expect. Jesus was taken off the cross before sunset. And 4 hours later, the sun went down. Hopes dashed. But for the most people of Jerusalem, Israel, and the rest of the world, they went about their ordinary days. As you re-walk the steps back to the beginning, reflect on what had occurred on this path and the sacrifice that Jesus made for you and for me.